Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. Let's get right to it. The political fight over the soaring prices at the gas pump. We watched as prices in Indiana hit a record high. Gas Buddy put the average statewide above $4.26 per gallon, almost a full penny higher than the record set back in 2011. It came as President Biden announced that he was cutting off Russian oil and gas imports to the U.S. over the war in Ukraine. And let's welcome in Republican Representative Jackie Walorski. Representative Walorski, good to see you. You saw the president's speech banning Russian oil and gas here in the United States. Your thoughts?
Well, that's fine. He did that because of the pressure, bipartisan pressure that Congress has put on him. And the Republicans have been leading on this for months. So was I surprised to see him move? No, because that's what the American people are asking him to do. But that's only one half of the coin. And we have to talk about the fact that if we're going to be energy independent again, because we were just a couple of years ago, then we have to produce here domestically. So we can ban that Russian oil, which is fine and should be. And that's what every American in this country wants. But we are not helping Americans until we absolutely get back to producing our own oil, opening up not just the Keystone, but there's other oil available in the States, and do that. And that's where he refuses.
Well, I'm going to bounce around a little bit since you brought it up. As far as Keystone goes, as you very well know, the White House points out that it wouldn't be operating at this point, that it could take a long time. So what are the options, and is it fair to focus on Keystone? Well,
I think, what's the solution here? Right? Americans can't afford the price of gas. They're not going to be able to afford to even be able to go to work if the prices continue, and they probably will. But there's no time like the present to start the alternative, which is get us back on domestic fuel. It's never going to come back if this president doesn't undo his executive order. That's the moment that we need right now. Start the process. And in the meantime, we'll continue to go in that direction. We'll continue to try to work for other areas of an avenue. But we can't go to Venezuela and hook ourselves up with terrorists that hate us just because we're shutting off the Russian pipeline. We need domestic oil. That's the answer.
Did the president wait too long to ban Russian oil?
Of course he did. Hasn't he waited too long in everything he's done when it comes to foreign policy? We are absolutely too late to the game with Russia and what's happening in Ukraine. So here we are, late in the game again, but we can correct this, and that's what the American people are asking for. Let us produce domestically like we were 2 years ago. It's not like we haven't done this. It's not like we can't do it. We need him to repeal that ban that he has in this country and let Americans do what we do.
As you very well know, gas prices, because of this move, probably going to surge. Is your party willing to accept that in order to stop Russia?
It doesn't have to be that way. It does not have to be that way, and that's what we're saying. And that's why it's like, okay, so, because of pressure, Biden responded and, is banning Russian oil. That's not the excuse for higher prices. Prices were going up prior to this. I mean, people in my district were already complaining of what it's going to look like this summer. Complicated now by what's happening in Russia. So you can't do one without the other, and he cannot blame this crisis on what's happening in Russia. This crisis is Joe Biden's problem, and he owns it, and only he can get us out of it.
Also coming out of that speech today, the president, I appreciate you taking some time, the president also warned against what he called corporate greed. Do you believe companies are taking advantage of this?
I think right now, corporations coming out of COVID for the last 2.5 years, coming out of Biden policy since January of last year, are trying to hang on. And I don't think anybody's thinking right now of anything else other than we had policies that worked in this country. It's absolutely doable. And what every company and individual needs in this country is a turnaround of the Biden administration policies on this war on American energy.
Back here in the Hoosier State, as you very well know, there's a move to consider suspending taxes on gasoline purchases. Should the federal government consider the same thing?
Well, I think we can consider all we want. And, it can be deliberative, and maybe we should have those discussions. But there's no answer out of this other than producing domestically. America saw this under the former administration. Every American did well in the economy, had more money in their pocket. And now here we are with something that looks, unbelievable, and it's tough. And Americans understand where we are. So maybe we can discuss those things, but what we know is tried and true. And we have the background and we have the data to show we need domestic oil production in this country.
Congresswoman Jackie Walorski, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.
All right, to the Democrats now. They're talking the success of the American Rescue Plan here in Indiana, 1 year after President Biden signed it into law during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also asked Congressman Andre Carson several questions about the economy and gas prices as well, including if the U.S. should be producing more oil domestically.
I think so. Even my buddy Elon Musk, he has stated that. But I think beyond that, we can't keep tapping into our strategic petroleum reserve, which would last us about 10 years in the case of an emergency. I think that we have to take a bigger step and move away from our dependency on oil, period. And I think it's an environmental concern. I think it's a climate concern, but I think it's the right thing to do ultimately, because that kind of freedom gives us a different kind of leverage globally.
The CBO budget director recently said that the ARP had some indirect influence on inflation. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I'm not an economist. I think I think what it does do is that it addresses those needs that were unmet under the Trump administration. ARP is monumental, even though Republicans fought against it. I think that we have yet to see the results a year later, but I think for the next year and years to come, we will see the results and the fact that it was absolutely necessary. Listen, many of my friends who serve with me in the new Democratic caucus are concerned about fiscal matters. But we share that concern with Republicans, but I don't think that those fiscal concerns should supersede the need to address the people. We are still the wealthiest nation in recorded history, and the wealthiest nation in recorded history should be able to take care of her citizens in a way that still provides some sense of dignity and in a way that will get us away from rising poverty, which can result in rising crime and indirectly higher inflation. We know that inflation is cyclical. I'm not an economist, but what conservative economists and liberal economists have told us and have told me is that inflation is cyclical. I think that the idea is to lower inflation by ARP as well as the global release of strategic petroleum reserves so we can ease the pain, and ultimately something that I've been pushing as a member of the Transportation Caucus and the Transportation Committee has been for us to get away from our dependency on foreign oil, which has been another contributor to inflation, according to economists.
Can you walk us through the country and Congress's response so far to the situation in Ukraine? Is the U.S. doing enough right now, or do further steps need to be taken to address this?
Well, I think Russia's premeditated attack against Ukraine is an attack on democracy and a grave violation of international law, quite frankly. I think Russia's violation of Ukraine's sovereignty sends a message. It's you're not just committing war crimes, but you're engaging civilians in a disinformation war and misinformation war. And I think the global community has become awakened to these strategies.
All right, coming up inside the final chaotic hours of the Indiana legislative session, our Garrett Berquist shares all of that next on All Indiana Politics. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. Let's turn now to state issues. This week, we watched as Republican lawmakers used the final chaotic hours of the legislative session to come to decisions on some of the top issues before lawmakers. News 8 State House Bureau reporter Garrett Berquist was there for it all.
The divide between the House and the Senate led to some big changes in key legislation. It even derailed efforts to restrict how teachers approach social justice concepts in the classroom. But most Republican priorities landed on the governor's desk in some form.
Members of the legislature's Republican supermajority say they have plenty to celebrate. Chief among them, a bill to lower the individual income tax rate to 2.9% over 7 years, if revenue allows. It also ends a pair of utility taxes.
We're excited about repealing URT, start the income tax reductions, and it gives us a chance over the next 9 months to see where we're at and build see where the budget is and build a budget that I think will be able to continue to make investments and also hopefully return even more money back to Hoosier taxpayers.
The Senate watered down that bill from its original form. That was a common refrain this session. Negotiations between the two chambers also changed a bill to regulate nonprofit bail organizations. Such groups won't be able to pay bail for someone charged with a violent crime or someone who has a prior violent criminal conviction. But there's no longer any limit to how much they can pay to get someone out of jail.
Our communication with them, both on the leadership front as well as committee chairs and just members, has been really fantastic, and it allowed us to get an awful lot of things across the finish line that I think are going to be good policy for the state.
The Senate went along with the House's plan to allow Hoosiers to carry a concealed handgun without a permit. This despite opposition from law enforcement. And a bill to ban transgender girls from girls K-12 sports teams passed the General Assembly last week.
Too many bills, I think, that we've seen written try to find solutions to problems that don't exist. We've seen that kind of day after day, and I think we had a real opportunity to, when we entered this session, to do some really good, powerful things.
Senate Minority Leader Greg Taylor says he's especially troubled by the use of conference committees to revive dead bills behind closed doors, such as the permitless carry bill.
Legislation passed the House, didn't get a hearing here. Legislation passed the Senate, didn't get a hearing over there. Ends up in a conference committee report, and that's par for the course. But unfortunately, like the Superintendent Carter said, that's the problem with the supermajority. We can't stop it.
The governor has 7 days to act once each bill is formally presented to him. Lawmakers will return on May 24th to consider whether to override any potential vetoes. At the State House, Garrett Bergquist, Wish TV, wishtv.com, and follow us on Facebook.
And coming up, the best political team in Indiana ready to break down the fight over gas prices. Next on All Indiana Politics. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome back in part of our best political team in the state, Tom John, former Marion County Republican Party chairman, and Kip Tu, former chairman of the Indiana Democratic Party. Gentlemen, good to see you. Let's start with the surging gas prices on this Sunday. Kip, I'll go to you first. Why shouldn't the White House and President Biden share some of the blame for the rising cost?
Well, they're going to get some of the blame because the Republicans, are Johnny One Note on this issue. But when prices go up, when there's Republican presidents, they all say, well, the president really doesn't have much to do with the rise in price in gasoline. But when there's a Democrat in power, they're like, oh, well, the Democrats have to do something about the rise in price in gasoline. We've heard this over and over and over. I mean, the fact of the matter is it's a market economy in some respects, and it's responding to supply and demand in some respects. I think you're seeing a heck of a lot of price gouging by people who are trying to take a profit. And there's no doubt that, the war in Ukraine has had some effect. I don't know that it's had a big effect. I think more effect is people trying to take profits, but the president's doing what a president can do in this respect. The Republicans' complaints, I know you had Jackie Walorski on earlier saying, we need to open up the Keystone Pipeline. That's years away, and the pipeline itself is designed for transporting oil from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico to be exported elsewhere. So it's just a red herring completely. There are 9,000 permits out there right now not being used by oil companies.
Well, there you go. Tom, go ahead, jump in on that, because why are they not being used?
Well, in fact, the number being used is a historic high. You never have 100% used because you have environmental groups inciting litigation to try and stop people from producing at any given time at the best time. But the situation's much worse now because you had the Biden administration from day one came in hostile to domestic industry. Not only Keystone's emblematic of the bigger problem. Terminating leasing of federal lands and offshore lands, higher regulations to disincent people from investing in our infrastructure for energy. And this is just exactly what was happening last fall before this even happened. This would have been somewhat of a problem because of the Biden policies without the Ukraine, but then the mishandling of the Ukraine, the slowness to act before the actual acts happened, and the fact that this has now escalated to the point that we've had to reach the point of actually freezing Russia out of the world markets, has exacerbated the problem. But this really does come back to the simple fact, all you have to do is go back to Biden's campaign discussion.
But Tom, could the president have really done all of that before the Ukraine-Russia situation actually happened?
Excuse me?
Could the president really done all of that to alleviate some of those stresses for these companies before the situation in Ukraine happened?
Well, the fact is he introduced many of these stresses on January 20th of last year when he signed a variety of executive orders that were doing exactly these things. When you're he terminated the leasing of federal lands. A court then reversed that in June, and they still haven't released any leases. This is an administration.
You and I have discussed this over and over again. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, we discussed this over and over. Look, we were coming out of a pandemic. There was lots of volatility during the pandemic. Prices dropped because people weren't at home. People were at home and they weren't traveling. Demand surged. The long-term policies that the Biden administration is trying to put in place are the wise long-term policies, and that is to protect our climate. There has to be a balance, and that's the long-term thing. And this is a short-term crisis, these prices, and they will fluctuate even more as we move forward. Blaming it on this president's policies to try to protect our climate is counterproductive and just not true.
That being said, Kip, and we've talked about this before as well, these prices are where they are right now come midterms. The political fallout, that could be pretty bad for the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, because that's all the Republicans are going to want to talk about because they are out of ideas. And so they're going to say your gas prices are because of the president, even though they know it's not the fact. And most of them, spend most of their time just trying to say that they believe in a free market. But they don't believe in a free market when it comes to apparently gas prices because they want the president to come in and clamp down. I mean, they talk out of both sides of their mouth on this stuff all the time.
All right, let's switch the conversation to a little stateside stuff here. The state legislature, we saw a lot of last-minute changes, bills that appeared dead, worked into other bills with little to no public announcement. Is this really how this should work? And Tom, I'll go to you first on this one.
Well, this is something that's not new at the General Assembly. The rules are pretty clear. If a bill passes a House, it's live for conference committee. And most of the bills that we're talking about passed a House. And people may not like it that it didn't go through the full process, but it is the process. These are rules that have been in place for decades and some of them going back to the actual inception of our state. So, you always see things when you make the sausage that you don't love, but it's politics. You have a democracy that's working, and that's way better than you see in other parts of the United States or other parts of the world.
Kip, your thoughts on what we saw this week?
Well, I think Tom's largely right about what he just said. I would just add this. There were some rulings in the House this year on germaneness of bills where second reading amendments were not allowed to be considered because Republicans didn't want to take votes on them. And they ruled very close on those things and then turned around in conference committee and let things get put together that had no real nexus to one another. That kind of thing, I think they need to be more consistent about, and they weren't very consistent
Kip, quickly,
about.
I have 30 seconds left. Do you believe the governor will sign the trans athlete bill and permitless carry bill as well?
I'm afraid he's going to sign the trans bill, and I hope he vetoes the permitless carry. If he goes against his own state police chief, I'll be very surprised.
Tom?
I have no idea. I don't want to pontificate on that.
Don't want to get involved, huh? I understand. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and we'll be right back.
Take All Indiana Politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
And thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. This week, we'll be keeping a close eye on Governor Eric Holcomb and whether or not he signs some of those controversial measures. The two at the top of the list, of course, one that bans transgender girls from school sports and one that does away with handgun permit requirements. And remember, we'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. Have a great rest of your weekend.